Alright, what's up everybody? Thank you guys all for coming. This is, I just want to tell you, just want to keep your eyes and ears out for the concert. He's in, I guess, maybe a 4-stage process, really, if you think about it. Like we've spent a really cool semester studying a lot of music. It's been the best kind of study where Noah's taken things that he's been passionate about and interested in for as long as I've known him, and he kind of made a really, painstaking, thorough, rigorous study of it, and then kind of taking things he's learned and written a whole bunch of music, and I guess right now you say we're in stage 3 where he and some good buds are rehearsing and trying to learn and get acclimated to some music, and they're going to perform at the end of January, so please look out for that, obviously before you guys all finish up the winter study. So, thanks for coming. Let's welcome Noah Jacobson.
You guys clapped for me? Thank you all for coming. This was a really exciting project that Kris and I have been working on for a really long time, and I'm really excited to present to you, so let's get into it. So this is Prime Time. It's a combination of some music that Kris and I studied this semester and some of the music that I wrote. I want to present to you all of the findings that we had, and yeah, let's get started. So the real question that I set out to ask was, what is an odd meter? So like conventionally, that's anything that's not in 4 or 3. So I'm going to play a couple of clips, and I want to see what you guys think these are. Anyone know what that's in?
It's in cut time, right?
Yep, it's in 2, which is 4. How about this one? It's footprints Wayne Short. It's in 3, right? How about this one? That's 7 C's by Avishai Cohen. The title kind of gives it away, but it's in 7. It's in a big 7. There's lots of cool subdivisions happening on the inside. Yeah, how about this one? So that's Guarded Heart by Emmanuel Wilkins, one of my favorite saxophonists and composers. That song is in a bunch of different time signatures. There's some 4, there's some 3, there's some 7, there's some 6. It's kind of all over the place, but it really flows with the melody, which is really cool. And this is the last one. I had to change the title slide of this presentation to music in odd meters, so I could include this example, not jazz in odd meters, but I really needed to include this. So.
1, 2, 3, my baby romance around me, she loves me so, and it's like no one show. What does she really wanna? Can't stand to see me walk out the door.
So yeah, that's AI by Outkast. It's in 11, if you didn't know that. It's in a set of 4, and then a set of 7. So that's a really cool thing about that song, that Outkast, Andre in particular, was able to make a song that's in such a weird time, like 11. Like, who thinks of 11 when they think of like a pop song? But everyone dances to it and sings along, and it really just vibes. So we've talked about what an odd meter is, and over the course of this semester I came up with an idea for 5 different categories of odd meters, and you heard a couple of them just there that I'll reference to, but the first type is simple odd meters. That's stuff like Magnolia Triangle, James Black, Take 5, Paul Desmond. 7 C's, to some extent, is kind of just in a big 7. It's a little more complicated than that, but there's also mixed meter, which is what you were hearing Guarded Heart Emmanuel Wilkins, where it kind of like goes kind of in a bar of 7 or like in a bar of 4, and like you add a little 6/8 as like a little turnaround to like get somewhere else. And then there's what I call subdivisional, which is also to some extent 7 C's and Guarded Heart, where you kind of have these like inner workings at like sub levels. So you're at like, you're in 4/4, but then if you go to the 8th note or the 16th note level, you can do things in like 5s and 7s that like add up to that big 4, so that you're not like in 4, but technically it adds up to like 16 beats, so it's in 4. And then there's polyrhythms, which are superimposing 2 rhythms over each other so that they realign at the beginning, but they kind of like drift apart and then come back together. And then the last one is what I call subdivisional mixed meter, where you're working with these kind of like higher level subdivisions in like 8th notes and 16th notes, but you're also not sticking to just like in 4/4, but it adds up to like 16. You're kind of like adding in that bar of 6/8 or that bar of 7, while still using these like subdivisions. So there are these 5 types of odd meters that Kris and I studied this semester, and the main lessons we took away from that were these 2 main ideas. One is that everything can be cut into 2s and 3s. 5 is just a 2 and a 3. 7, 2 2s and a 3. 11, you can take 2s and 3s and you can make all of these crazy different time signatures. And that's kind of where the power of these subdivisional and subdivisional mixed meter tunes come in, is because you can take bunches of 2s and 3s and turn what normally just like adds up to a regular like multiple of 4 and turn it into something crazy. And the other big takeaway we had from this semester was this idea of rhythmic resolution. And this is an idea I came up with to describe the phenomenon of odd meter music that uses the odd meter to kind of like emphasize transition points in the melody or the harmony. So like you have your basic harmony stuff, like a lot of you know like a 2/5, like you create tension and then you release when you get to 1. And that's like this idea of like a harmonic resolution. So rhythmic resolution, which we'll take a look at in a sec, is kind of like using the like push and pull, the ebb and flow of these 2s and 3s to like create kind of like a leaning back feeling or a like leaning forward feeling to emphasize certain points in the melody or in the rhythms. So let's start with a classic, Take 5, Paul Desmond. This is one of the tunes that really kicked off the odd meter craze. It's one of the earliest ones, this and Magnolia Triangle. Take 5 in 5, it's called Take 5. And I'm going to play a little bit of it, and I want to see if you can find where the rhythmic resolution is, where that emphasis is being put. So the emphasis is kind of on that 4th and 5th beat, right? You're in 5, but it's really a 3 plus a 2. It's da da ba da 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 da. And you're like really leaning on that 2. I mean, because 2 is smaller than 3, it kind of creates this natural like you're leaning back during the 3 and you're leaning forward during the 2. So it kind of creates this like rolling sensation where you kind of lay back for the ba ba da ba ba da, and then he hits ba da, and then you're right back on it. Ba da ba da ba da ba da ba da ba ba da da ba da da. It creates this rolling sensation by using this rhythmic resolution. You're kind of emphasizing these B flats here as they lead back into E flat by whether you want to think of it as like adding an extra beat from 4 or subtracting a beat from 6. You're kind of taking this normal time signature and creating this sense of urgency by putting it in 5 instead. The next song I want to look at is a mixed meter tune. This is Grace and Mercy by Emmanuel Wilkins. Fun fact, this was my #1 song on my Spotify Wrapped this year. It's really good. You should check it out. So the emphasis points in Grace and Mercy, if you're looking at the sheet music up there, you can already kind of see there's a lot of stuff going on. You've got 4/4 up here, but then you've got like a 6/4 here, 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 here. There's like a bunch of 6/4s, but it's in 4. But no, it's actually like kind of in 3 a little bit. And that's why it's a mixed meter in that category. And the real emphasis points here are the 3/4 and these underlined sections, which is the extra 2 beats added whenever he goes into 6/4. So if you feel the normal tune, you're kind of in this rolling 2. You're kind of feeling it a level of like subdivision back from where it's written. You're kind of feeling it 2/2. So it's ba 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 ba, and then these 6/4s come in, and it creates this like extra like moment before you realign, where you're ba 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 ba, and it kind of holds for a second. And it could just be in 4 and it would just keep going, but adding that extra second kind of gives a moment to breathe before it goes back to the offbeats again. And this 3 section is really in contrast to the 4 that the rest of the tune is really in, that you're suddenly in this entire different feel. Quickly the drummer goes into this like Afro-Cuban clicky feel, and the entire tonescape kind of changes. And it gets a little more urgent, and it feels a little more rushed and fast. And then you hit this main melody point right here, where it's kind of like in a big 5, because it's a bar of 4 plus a bar of 6, which is 10. And you kind of feel this like release, and you're in like a nice major harmonic spot, and you're kind of laid back, and you're back into 2, and you have that room to breathe because of the 6/4. And it's a really great way of emphasizing this melody, because it's a beautiful melody already, but giving it space to breathe just changes the entire way that you listen to it. Next, I want to show you a subdivisional tune, as I would call it, which is Típico by Miguel Zanon. Take a listen. Because if you could feel that it was in 5, you'd be correct. It is in 5, and if you look at these, each of these little bars here adds up to 10, to 10 eighth notes, which makes it 5/4. But the cool thing about Típico, and I talked to Miguel a lot about this, I emailed him extensively when I was transcribing and studying this tune, is it's not a consistent 5. Like, it gets subdivided in different ways, and you can kind of see that here, is that there are these 6 distinct patterns. And these are the piano lines from underneath the saxophone from the beginning. But those 6 lines align with these 6 rhythmic patterns. And if you listen, the first time the he comes in on A. But the second time he comes in on C. So take a listen to that. And you can hear that it's the same melody. But by changing the subdivision, it completely changes the feel of it. The piano's playing something different, Miguel on saxophone is playing something completely different. And yet it's the same melody, it just like, there's a whole new wrinkle to it. And that's the great thing about Tipico, is that it's taking these 2s and 3s. Like, you take 5, you take it from 5/4 to 10/8, and then you take those 10 and you say, well, what can I do with these? Well, I can do 2 2s and 2 3s. I can do 3 3 2 2. I can do 3 2 2 3. When they're back to back, you get more used to them. So when you do 3 3 2 2, you kind of get used to the 3, and then the 2 is more urgent. When they alternate, you feel the bigger 5. So like when we're in like E and F, when it goes 3 2 3 2 or 2 3 2 3, you kind of like naturally you just kind of gravitate towards a more larger 5 feeling to the tune. And it's this really interesting way of taking a simple 5, the whole tune's in 5, but giving it 6 different things and then rotating through those unevenly, so that the tune just never gets boring. Like, you could listen to just that A subdivision, and like after 2 minutes you get like, okay, this is like, I've heard this enough. But by cycling through 6 of them, it's just like, it's constantly changing. There's always something new to listen to. So that's the cool thing about subdivisional tunes. Now we're going to take a look at some polyrhythms. Tigran Hamasyan is an Armenian jazz fusion pianist, and this stuff is going to sound very different from the stuff you've been hearing for the last couple of minutes because his music has a very different aesthetic, but it's critically important to understanding polyrhythms and subdivisional stuff, so take a listen to Entertain Me. So yeah, what's that? So the sheet music for that pattern is up here at the top. It's in a bar of 5/4 and a bar of 15/16. And you can kind of see based on the beaming here, and you can kind of hear it too, because you're hearing bum 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 bum, and that's 4 sets of 5 and then 5 sets of 3, which you can kind of see up here, the 4 sets of 5 and then 5 sets of 3. But again, if you just listen to that over and over again, it'll start to get boring, you'll start to like expect it and it gets repetitive. But if you take a listen to what the drums are doing, this is where things get crazy. The drums are playing in 4. They're just grooving in 4. And as you can see here, the first time through at the very beginning of the song, these purple numbers and underlines are where the emphasis falls against this 4 5s and 5 3s pattern. But as you can see, because if you add all these 16th notes up, you get 35, right? 20 plus 15, 35. 35 and 4 don't go well into each other. That's math. And I'm not good at math, but even I know that. And because of that, when you play the drums in 4 against this pattern, you get these purple numbers the first time around, but then it offsets and you get these black arrows, these numbers here, 10, 11, 12, and so on. But that's where the emphasis falls the second time. And it'll rotate forward the third time, and again the 4th time, and the 5th time. And it turns out, that if you find the least common multiple of 4 and 35, it's 140. Again, math. The calculator told me so. But if you do the math on that, you get 140 16th notes. You kind of heard around like 30, 40 seconds into this recording that everything lined up again. There's a big cymbal crash and we're back at the beginning. But it takes like 45 seconds to get to that recycling. And that's because it takes 140 16th notes to reset. And that's the really cool polyrhythm here is you'll hear polyrhythms of like 4 against 3s, like stuff like that you'll hear all the time. It's like a cool thing to do to mix things up in 4 and 3. But 35 against 4 is kind of, it's a little out there. And Entertain Me is just this fascinating song because of this crazy drum line underneath this melody line. Another T-Brown song I want you to take a listen to is Vardavar. Vardavar starts in 4/4, as you can see in the sheet music here. But it's not really in 4/4. This is what I was talking about subdivisional. This is kind of a polyrhythmic and a subdivisional song. It's in 4/4 nominally, but you'll hear that it's really hard to fit just a simple metronome tap to it in 4, because it's actually in 5/5/3 5/5/4/5. So take a listen and try to find that. There's a really cool recording of this where he and his band play on top of a mountain and he plays a Hello Kitty keyboard. It's really hit. You should check it out. Vardavar is this incredible tune because it's in 4, but it's in this like 5/16, 5/16, 3, 5/4/5 pattern. But that's not even the coolest part because again, if you listen to that over and over and over again, it's like really cool and it kind of like tickles your brain a little bit, tickles your ear, but like you'll get used to it eventually. But then you listen to what he does near the end of the tune, and you see what these big 5 on top of it is. He does a 5 against 8 polyrhythm, and you'll start to hear that coming in near the end. So you're superimposing a big 5 that I was clapping over the recording against this like small 8, but it's not even 8 because it's technically this like 5s and 3s and 4s pattern. And it just turns into this crazy like jarbled mix of amazing music that I love. But it's this really cool aspect of this rhythmic resolution thing, right? Because you're trying to hear that original pattern, but you're hearing this like really laid back thing. And then the original pattern comes back in, and you kind of, your ears can kind of just like rapidly switch between the big 5 and the like subdivision thing. And like each one gives you something. Like the big laid back 5 is really like comforting, and it feels really nice to like sit in. But that original groove, that 5/5/3 5/5/4/5, is so like energetic and upbeat, and I always gravitate back towards that because it's just like really uplifting for me to listen to. And there's another aspect to this, which is after that comes back in, the underlying subdivision completely drops out and we're just in the 5, so take a listen to that. It's almost a new song. And yet you can still kind of hear, because of the chordal structure and like some aspects of the rhythm, that it is the same song. And if you actually go super nitty-gritty into the math, which I'm not going to do because I'm bad at math, but if you go super nitty-gritty into the math, the pattern in the big five is actually the same pattern as the 5-5-3-5-5-4-5, but scaled up so that it's like 3-3-2-3-3, 2.5, 3. And you can take the entire thing and scale it up from 4 to 5, and it's the exact same pattern, which is why it sounds so familiar, even though it's completely different, and it's on a different time signature and scale and feel and everything. But it's just a fascinating piece of music. That last category of odd meters that I talked about was subdivisional mixed meters. So this song is Yanera by, again, Jacobson. If you didn't already know, I'm kind of obsessed with this guy. He's amazing. And before I even play it, just look at the music up there, and you can already see there's like too much going on. You've got 12, you've got 15, you've got 18, 8. You're like rapidly switching between these. So I invite you, if you want to, just close your eyes when you listen to this, and just like forget that there's even all of these crazy notation things, because much as I love all of these crazy odd meters, at some point, the way that you decide what meter it's in is entirely predicated on how the person who wrote it notated it. And Kris and I were talking about this, about a bunch of tunes this semester, but like, if you gave a recording of one of these tunes to 10 different people and told them to transcribe it, you very well could get 10 different rhythmic transcriptions of like where it's at. It could be 4/4 with like an added 1 at the end, it could be 5, it could be like anything. So this tune, if you want to when you're listening to it, just try to like, instead of trying to feel where's the 12, where's the 15, are we in 18 right now, just kind of listen to the melody and notice how it flows and how it doesn't really need bar lines. It's almost just kind of like, if you really wanted to, you could tap all of the eighth notes frantically, but you can kind of just sit back in it, and it's a really nice melody. So the really cool thing about this melody is, when I listen to it with my eyes closed and I don't try to think about the 18s and the 12s and the 15s, it just sounds so natural. It's like, you could write, there are plenty of beautiful ballads in 4 and 3 and 5 even, but there's nothing quite like this. And yet it sits so well on its own in this kind of like weird place where bar lines aren't really a factor except for the drummer to know which groove to be in. But the melody kind of just flows on its own. And especially in this A1 section where the saxophone lays out, you can hear that the rhythm section kind of just hits these pause points, and it kind of resets your like rhythmic palette. You're not, at least when I listen to it, I'm not trying to count through those rests. I kind of just take a pause, take a breath, and then it comes back in, and then I take a breath, and then it comes back in. And it's this really cool way of kind of using the subdivisions. You could try to fit this, like, if you add 18 and 12, you get 30, and you add 24, and you're 54, but like it's already, you're like already losing the point, because the point is that it sounds good, right? And that Miguel wrote it this way because it was easiest this way for them to read it off of sheet music, but this isn't necessarily the way that it sounds. You can even see like this note is tied over a bar line, and this note's tied over a bar line, and that note's tied over a bar line in there too. It's like these bar lines are really here for legibility, and I think in some ways, my journey, if you want to call it, through all these crazy odd time signatures, it really started back in my wind ensemble in high school when my director said bar lines are just there so you can tap your foot and count along to the music, but they don't actually need to put them there. Like, you can just play all of your notes, and if everyone's good enough at playing all of their notes, you don't need the bar lines. And I think the idea is subdivisional mixed meter songs kind of reach a level where where they don't really need bar lines anymore. If you just like feel where the notes land, like obviously that's like incredibly difficult, but like the idea is like when you're listening to it, you don't need to like count it out to understand it like in your ear. It just kind of sounds really nice, even though it's crazy and unbelievably complex. So that's a little trip through all of the things that Kris and I studied this semester, those 5 categories. And now I want to present to you the compositions that I wrote this semester for the Primetime Suite, which I will be performing in January. So I'm going to use it over there and hop over to the new score. We're going to start with Beatdown. Beatdown is a tune that I wrote originally in 3. I wrote it as a ballad in 3, and the compositional exercise here was, I am known notoriously in my combo for writing tunes in really weird time signatures that don't feel super normal. And while this may not feel entirely natural to begin with, we've gotten a really good feel for it. But I wanted to try composing a song in an odd time meter where I start in a regular time signature and then I add a beat or subtract a beat to every bar to create a new time signature, and then I alter the melody. So a couple people here remember a year or 2 ago when we played All the Things in 7 with the melody of Prince Albert, and we called it Prince Albert because we cut the T off. We recently heard Bruce and Jeb at the Jazz Day concert play they played Prince Albert in its original time signature, which is just 4/4. And it was the first time I'd ever heard the actual melody of the tune, like without cutting a note off the end. And so the idea I wanted to do was, what if I do the reverse of that? What if I start by writing a tune that's normal, and then I cut a beat off the end? So Beatdown started in 3, and then I lopped an 8th note off of it, and then we got 11/8. So take a listen to this. It's a really nice ballad in 11. So that's the melody for Beatdown. The interesting thing about Beatdown is when I removed that 8th note, it gave me access to all sorts of things, going back to those 3s and 2s. Because when you take a bar of 3 and you turn it into a bar of 5, you just naturally are left with a 3 and then a 2. But you don't have to always do it the exact same way, the way that like Take 5 does it, which is really, really hip, and I really, really love it. But I wanted to try and flip it around. So here we have a dotted quarter, so that's the 3, and then 2 8th notes, which is the 2. But here we lead with the 2 8th notes and then the dotted quarter. So we're flipping it around. We do some 3s followed by some 2s followed by 3s. But almost every time we play a full bar of 3, it's felt as 3/4 notes. So you're going into it and you're feeling and it kind of gives this lifting feeling on those 3s. You're kind of adding that extra beat in. And it's kind of funny that I took a song I originally wrote in 3, I took a beat off of it, and it feels like there's more space instead of less. By creating that 3, there's more of a like uplifting, that rolling feeling again. The other things that I did when I wrote this tune is I borrowed a technique from my favorite jazz composer, Kenny Wheeler. Often Kenny Wheeler would write a tune that was, say, 16 bars like this one, and then he would take the whole thing, he'd write it all down again, but up or down a half step. He'd transpose the chart that he just wrote, and then he would change the last chord of each of those heads so that they would cycle back into each other perfectly. So what I did was I wrote these 16 bars up to this double bar here. And then I took that whole thing and I said, well, the first chord's in D. What if I made that first chord E flat? So I took the whole thing, I do it by 1/2 step, I transpose, And then I took the melody and I said, well, in this first bar of 11, it goes up and then it comes down. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to bring it down and I'm going to bring it back up. In this second system here, we go down and then we go up. So in this second system here, we go up and then we come down. And I kind of wrote this carbon copy and then I kind of flipped all of the melody progressions so that it no longer feels like I'm just playing this, but off by a half step. It feels like an entire, it feels similar because it's like a brother to it almost. It's like a sibling, but it's distinctly different. And with these last chords, you can cycle between the transpositions. And again, when you hit that resolution here, you hit the D major 9, and then you come back to a D minor 7 flat 5. So beatdown is all about harnessing those 3s and 2s to create a rolling feeling that keeps the ballad going, but creates urgency and at times also relief and lift, while also kind of using these alternating waves of melody to create a contrast that feels distinctly familiar and yet different. So that's the first tune I wrote for the independent study. The second tune that I wrote was haiku, which, as you might see, speaks for itself. I've recently fallen back in love with poetry. Kris told me to plug my poetry Instagram. There is one, if you can find it. I'm not going to plug it, but I've been writing a lot of poetry recently, especially haikus, and I was writing a haiku, and I said to myself, what if I wrote a jazz song that has the rhythms of a haiku? So I said, well, that would be a 5, and then a 7, and a 5. And I said to myself, what can I do with a 5, a 7, and a 5? And I said, well, I can do these cascading melody lines that you can kind of see here, and I can do some interesting stuff with 2s and 3s with the chords, as you can see here. But what I really wanted to do was I wanted to contrast the two kinds of haikus that I write. I write silly, fun, uplifting haikus, and a lot of the time I write haikus about like struggles that I'm going through, like when times are bad, like I didn't get enough sleep, or I got a bad grade on a paper, or I'm just like not feeling good. And so the idea of haiku is that it opens and closes with this really beautiful, like nice, comfortable, slow, major key resolving haiku. And yet the middle, the bulk of this tune, is this really frenetic, turbulent, cascading minor key haiku line that's much faster and harder to keep a grip on. So I'll play you a little excerpt of this, but you'll kind of hear what I'm getting at. So you can hear that this section here is really, it's nice and laid back and comfortable. It's in a resolution from D flat minor 7 to a B major, which is really nice to hear. And then we hit this D minor, and then we're in C minor, and then we're in E minor, and it's all these fast lines that are in this minor key. I actually have a recording of us playing this just the other night. Oh, I'm gonna try this recording. I have a recording of this from the other night. You can kind of hear with the drums added especially, thank you Hal, by the way, for your awesome rhythms. And thank you to everyone in the combo, Curran and Hal and Newman and Aditya for all of your hard work on all these tunes. You guys have been amazing. It sounds great, and we're really excited to perform in January. But you can hear kind of in this recording that it's up-tempo, it's frenetic. We've got this like this 5 and this 7 don't really fit together. I mean, it's in 17. 17 is not easy to play, and it's not easy to feel. And if you try to just snap along to it, you'll start to realize that you're on off beats and it doesn't really sound right. And yeah, it'll cycle back, but it doesn't really feel good. But then you get to that nice resolving section at the end, and everything feels good. You're just in. Those nice chords there, you're in some majors, you're in some D major as well. You're getting these nice resolutions, and it sounds really good and comfortable to be in, and yet this section is really turbulent. And that was the goal of haiku, was to create a song that showcased the form of haiku as a jazz song, but didn't just say, oh, we're going to be in 17 now. It really took to heart the kinds of haikus that I write, haikus about nature that are really comforting, haikus about my personal struggles that aren't as comforting. So that was haiku. The third song that I wrote, this is a fun one. This is 60 seconds, give or take. So it's 60 seconds, give or take, because if you look mathematically at the structure of the tune, you'll see that the A section is 4 bars of 5/8, which is 20. Then you'll see the B section is 4 bars of 5/8 and a bar of 3, which is 23. And then if you look at the C section and you add up all of the numbers here, you'll get 17. So if you add up 20 and you add up, so you add 2 20s and you add 2 23s and you add a bunch of 17s, and you get, give or take, like 60 as a common denominator there. So if you play through once through A, B, and C, you get 60 beats. So I need 60 seconds, give or take, because you never know how much we're going to have on one. But you can take a listen. I'll play the recording of it. It's a really interesting exercise that I was doing in kind of taking this 5, and we get comfortable in this 5, but then we add that wrinkle of the 3/8. And when we come to this 17 section in C, it kind of throws us for a loop every time, because it's really hard to catch these 2 bars of 5/8 here, because you're really splitting a single bar of 5/4 in the middle, and that never feels good next to a bar of 3, but it sounds really cool. And one of the cool things about it is that if you add all these up, it's really 4 bars of 3 and a bar of 5/4. And if you add all those together, you can really just snap your way through it in single quarter notes, and you'll come out at the end in the right place. But you could also feel it as 3 and then a little 5 and then a little 5 and then 3 big 3s. And so you'll kind of hear the way that the horn players play it, me and Aditya, we play it trying to stick really close to that quarter note, because that's the easiest way for us to hit those notes in the right spots. But the rhythm section really sticks to these actual time signatures and where the chords are. And it creates these 2 distinct different versions of C that you can kind of swap between hearing. It's really cool. So let me play you the recording. It's this bar of 3/8 here, and if you heard the recording there, what's happening here is if you look at the bass line, you can see that these 5s are really subdivided as a 3 plus a 2 in that order. So it's bum, 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 bum. And what's happening is you're getting 3/2, 3/2, 3/2, 3/2, 3. And when you add that 3, when it loops back around, you're getting 2 consecutive 3s. Because you could just alternate this. You could just go 3/2, 3/2 forever. And that's what this is. But by adding that 3 there, it disrupts the flow. And when you come back around to the beginning of B, you're hitting a 3 again. And that creates that familiarity with the 3 feel, just naturally. And that makes that 2 all the more disrupting, which creates, again, this kind of rolling feeling from 5, but really emphasizes it by adding a 3. So 60 seconds was an exercise both in writing in a simple 5 like this. This could have been an entire tune on its own. But then taking that structure and adding and subtracting from it. So turning it into a 23, turning it into a 17, messing around with that big 20 that we start with here in A. And especially with this bar of 3 here as it loops, it's just, the 3s consecutively is my favorite part of this tune. And the other cool thing about it is that if you're feeling it as 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, then the 3 is creating space, because it's a 3, it's longer than 2, right? So it's creating space. But if you feel those 5s as big 5s rather than as 2s and 3s, the 3 is actually a smaller subdivision, it creates urgency. So again, there's like 2 ways of feeling this B section here, where this little extra 5th bar here is kind of creating that rolling feeling, you're leaning forward, or there's a way of feeling it where you're kind of leaning back and the 2s are leaning forward. So it's this really cool, like, the duality of the subdivision here that allows you to feel it different ways. The 4th tune I wrote is called Schunken. Schunken is the German word for drunkenly swaying to music at an Oktoberfest concert. It's my favorite name for any of these tunes. It's actually derived from Yiddish, which I love. But Schunken is derived from Vardavar, which is that T-grown tune that's in 4, but it's like nominally in 4. It's in this like crazy subdivision. So Schunken is nominally in 4. I say that here in the subtitle, it's not cheeky. But the subdivision is 773-555. So take a listen. I'm actually going to isolate out the. Thank you, News Corp, for making my dynamics really small. The melody here, and I just want you to listen to the piano line in particular. Now, the drums are split into 2 staffs because this one is in the subdivision and this one's in 4. Now, if I take this and I remove the 4, and you can really hear that subdivision coming through when I remove the 4. Now, if I swap out and I remove that and I keep the 4 in, it sounds completely different. And you can feel that the emphasis is completely shifted. Instead of feeling really frantic and leaning in on each of these like 2s and 3s and 7s and 5s, and you're really leaning back. You're kind of just sitting back and letting the piano wash over. And the piano's this cool like texture thing, but it's not really the tune. The tune's in 4. And that's why I have 2 melody lines written. So my first melody line fits with the subdivision. And my second melody line fits with the 4 and emphasizes that. So by using the melody, I can kind of shift the focus from the piano line and those subdivisions that the bass is playing back and forth between that and the overarching 4. So Schunken was a really interesting exercise in kind of trying to harness what Vardavar was doing. There was a point at which I was trying to do a 7/16 polyrhythm here. Thankfully, that idea was scrapped because it is mathematically impossible to feel. But it was a really cool exercise still in trying to feel a 7 against a 16. The last tune that I wrote is called Lone Wolf, and I'm going to close up with this one. Lone Wolf, the idea was that I had covered a tune that was just in 11 and beat down, and I had covered in haiku, this kind of subdivisional thing. 60 Seconds was playing around with subdivisions and some polyrhythms over the bridge. And Schunken was really doing kind of the polyrhythm thing, but also some of the subdivisions and the mixed meter. Lone Wolf isn't really, I don't like to say that it's in a time signature. I mean, you can see here that it's like in 4 and there's a beat missing, and you'll hear it in a second. But the cool thing about Lone Wolf is that Lone Wolf is in 3 distinct sections. There's an intro that's in 4, missing a beat. beat, so there's a bar of 3 at the end of each system. The A section is in 5 with a bar of 4 at the end, and the bridge is in 3 with a bar of 2 at the end. And so we're kind of cycling between all of these things, and what I really wanted to do by removing those beats, I could have made this tune all in 4, all in 5, and all in 3, but I wanted to create that sense of urgency that we've been feeling, where you're kind of laying back and you're comfortable with it, and something fast comes up and you're suddenly leaning forward, and there's that sense of urgency. So let's take a listen to one, and I'll actually play our recording. The idea here with the feels, which is why I have drums written into this MUSE score file, is that I wanted to start in swing because this swing is really effective. Kind of feels like a hard bop tune. This was kind of inspired by a tune called Tacit Dance by Kenny Garrett that we played earlier this semester in our combo, where there's this one bit where there's a missing beat. And all the rest of the tune is just like even 4. There's that one bit that has this missing beat. And it kind of throws you for a loop because like sometimes you're expecting it and it's not there, and sometimes you're not expecting it and it is there. And we really had to internalize that, and that kind of inspired me to write Lone Wolf in this way. But the other thing that I was feeling was, one of my favorite grooves is the Afro-Cuban groove because it's really cool. And I wanted to use that over the 3, the bridge. But I also wanted to see what it sounds like over the 5, because 15/8 is really cool. So I wrote this section in swing. And then I took the Afro-Cuban and put it over the 3. So if you go to the 3 section, feels completely different because I'm doing the triplets now instead of the quartets. But when we come back into the 5 here, we're going to stay in this group, and it's going to sound completely different. And the cool thing about that is actually that by doing the math, because of this missing beat at the end of the bridge, the 3 section, you actually end up with a 3 plus a 2, which is 5. So you end up getting a full bar of the 5 Afro-Cuban before you get into an A2. So it's kind of like easing you in without you really even knowing it, because that missing beat almost like establishes familiarity with the 5 again. Lone Wolf is my favorite tune that I wrote this semester. I'm not honestly sure why. I think I like power chords, but I've just really enjoyed all the work I've done on this suite, and I've enjoyed all the studying that I've done with Kris, and I'm incredibly grateful to Kris for all of his support and all the work that he's done with me this semester. I'm really excited to perform this music in January, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much.